Alright, so the next video in the class, we're going to be going over hatching, cross-hatching, and planar drawing. You'll see that all of these terms kind of coexist. If you're going to draw objects using most of the planes, you're probably going to be using hatching and cross-hatching to some extent. So hatching and cross-hatching is essentially using single lines and overlaying sets of lines to create these patterns that when your brain looks at it, puts these patterns together to create tones. So this is just one set of lines. Notice how I'm using another set of parallel lines over the previous set to make a darker tone. And then if we add a third set here, it creates an even darker tone. And so if we even add another parallel set, it's even darker. So that is technically cross-hatching, but the idea of a set of parallel lines to draw and define objects, that is technically hatching. So cross-hatching is a more specific term to use when we're talking about hatching. And essentially hatching is just that movement. These are a set of hatches. So this is a very time and true method of drawing, whereas when we use charcoal to make different tones by blending and use subtractive drawing and additive drawing to basically blend lighter and darker tones together to create the form of the object. With this, we're going to approximate these tones using hatching, specific kind of lines, and they don't all have to be straight lines. You'll see that we'll be able to use curved hatch lines to go around more organic areas. So once again, I'm just using a mechanical pencil. The HB would be really good for this. If on your drawing you've drawn it in pencil, if you'd like to go over it with ballpoint pen to make it a little bit more lasting, you certainly can. But we're going to be, this is a kind of a more precise technique on how to draw our cup. So I'm just quickly going to, you should obviously measure more accurately than I am. This may not be a perfect cup, but in terms of the measuring, but for demo purposes, it'll work just fine. Okay, so we're basically gonna start with this. Hopefully it's not too terrible. Um, so to begin with, just like with our shading with the charcoal, you can kind of map out where your shadows are going to be. And from my perspective, there's like a big this large area here is in shadow. And so when you talk about hatching and cross hatching, we're looking for the planes of the object, and this is almost an abstract way of perception of seeing things. Now, with this portion of the cup, yes, this is a very distinctly rounded shape. So, if you feel most comfortable, you can at least begin by following this curve. You can almost on an instinctual level, you can tell that there is this curve here. So I'm going to do some rounded hatching techniques to really emphasize the curve. Now here, I mean, if in one way you could kind of say that the plane of this object too, you could almost say that the plane of this here is there's a very distinct curve coming up from the bottom of the cup as well. And then it straightens out as you get to the middle. And it curves again. And we've begun to crosshatch already. Now, to set in, I'm going across this way. You can say, hey, are you flattening out the object here? Not necessarily, because with hatching and cross-hatching, it's going to be an interesting investigation between your organic ones to set up curves, and then how do we start to lay in the tone here? So I'm just going in right across the object, because depending on where you put your highlights and where you put your curved hatch marks, you start to physically build. So remember, we have this dark, remember the shadow we were talking about, how where the shadow begins, it's darkest? Now that's really interesting, because notice how I'm going not straight across, but how I took those longer hatch marks and now I can really delineate using smaller hatch marks all the way down. You start to lay in the darkest dark of that shadow. Now there's some that you can see there's reflections of shadow, and you can even use curved hatch marks. You can go flat across. You might think it's counterintuitive to go flat across at an angle like what I'm doing, but if you build it up properly, and you see that there's some dark shadows in there, and I'm actually going to follow the cup a little bit more with this one, you start to see that actually your brain will piece these shadows together naturally, and it's real dark when it comes up to the lip of this cup, so let's lay in real dark. So with cross-hatching and hatching, it's really up to you how you see the planes of the object, how you see the reflections. So I've got some curved ones in there. There's some really dark reflected. So you can just kind of lay them in there. Gotta lay in some dark. We gotta lay in the rest of that dark shadow in here. So the more you overlap, the more interesting the shadows of the crosshatching become. kind of a compromise between following the form of the object and using our brain's natural tendency to put shadows together. So real distinct highlight there. But I'm going to follow the plane of this handle. This is a really distinct plane, which is really nice. Some real darks here. So see how I followed the plane of the handle of this cup versus the directional hatches, because there's a plane that goes this way, and then there's the part of the handle that goes that way. Kind of planes that go that way, some that go that way. But when you're within this mass here, it's really up to you how you figure out how much of these tones you can see. Like I can see a difference of tone right in here that flows along the roundness of this cup. There's all these tones that are just straight up and down. So you can go at an angle. As long as you're finding interesting angles in which to crosshatch, in which they overlap to make more tones, it's going to really benefit your drawing. So we've got some real distinct make these real nice darks in here. Remember, we got a little bit of reflected light. See how I get a little darker when I get to the edge of the cup? So we've got two distinct planes here. So I'm going the inside of the handle, which is more that direction. So it's directional hatching to emphasize the planes. So for the inside of the cup, we got some real dark lines that we can flow around the edge of this cup. Just a little bit of an eraser, get real nice and light in here. Lighter in there. And yeah, don't be afraid. I mean, you can really put in some nice fine details in here. See, these curved lines, they just stop at this edge though. That's what can emphasize the roundness on the interior. So you have some curved hatched lines, but they stop at the edge of the cup, which is really nice. Sometimes you feel it kind of flattens out when it gets towards the center, like any ellipse, it kind of flattens out. So I'll just set in the lip of this cup here. Got more of a dark shadow here, some darker shadows. See, I'm just kind of, it just sets in a dark. Luckily our brain just kind of puts it together. Some more that just kind of got a lot of tones just creeping into this art. This isn't really a white, so it just kind of creeps in. And just make sure there are sometimes you want to kind of emphasize. I can say it's kind of a flattened drawing when we do cross hatching, and yeah, that is true. Once again, depending on how you crosshatch, your brain will actually fill in and make some of these darks darker. So look how many times I've already gone over different areas with different strokes of crosshatching. So it really is, I mean, it's hard to get a handle on, but make sure you keep a light hand and just really work into your, just like with um, shading with charcoal. Just keep working with different directional strokes and trying to find where does it curve, where is it necessary to find the organic curved hatched line, or is it necessary to just fill it in with maybe an overall, another general set of hatch lines. So you really can build it literally crosshatch piece by crosshatch piece. And of course, don't forget your cast shadow, because it can flow across the table that way to really set it into place. So yeah, this is an interesting one. A lot of artists use this quite a bit. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, give it a try, and the more you practice your cross hatching and the directions on which the planes of these objects go, use that as a guide for your directional hatching. But the more you cross these lines over, the more breadth of tone, width of tone you can get in the drawing.